I don't believe OpenAI to be a model company. If you look at Gemini Pro, actually, they'll beat OpenAI in most of the benchmarks, right? Like they have much better accuracy, much better results. The reason why OpenAI is very successful, I think they're an app company where they have something called ChatGPT, which 1 billion people use every single day. And if you have 1 billion people using this, so that's a very viral product company than really a small company. So I think that there is a massive opportunity in building a really good product that brings delight to people and that can make you very successful quickly. Judge yourself by how much value you can create for your customer. And I think that's the ultimate thing that matters. There's a lot of debate. What is different about this? And tell me differentiation. And I'm like, Cursor didn't tell you what is the differentiator. ChatGPT didn't tell you what is differentiator. It's just people love the product. That provides huge value. And I think it's much important to be valuable, then be different. You can be different and not valuable, and that's not very useful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Future Proof. Today I sit down with Anant Bhardwaj. He is the founder and CEO of Instabase. Instabase is a platform for making sense of unstructured data with AI. And we covered a range of topics about unstructured data, including how models have affected product development strategy and how to find product market fit, how you can create value with LLMs for your agent apps, what kind of infrastructure bets that you might want to make as an AI native company, and also the future of agentic retrieval when working with unstructured data. Today's conversation is super insightful. Basically, Instabase was started a long time ago before any of these models were actually around. And Anna really talked about the transition between the early transformer architecture models that were out there and what has changed in the post LLM era, where basically every model is commoditized. I think he has really great insight on just value creation in general with AI products, where there's so much of a focus on specific model capabilities or really the technology around it. Something we cover on this podcast all the time is just that your product needs to be useful. And Anand has a great way of just bringing that out and laying out super practical advice for us on the specific areas that he thinks that AI products can really succeed and deliver value, specifically in end-to-end workflows and thinking about the complete experience. Hope you learn a lot from this. I think there's a lot to unpack. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to Future Proof. Today I'm here with Anant Bhardwaj. He is the founder and CEO of Instabase. Anant, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So we have a lot to cover today around unlocking the value of unstructured data for enterprises. I wanted to start by asking about the beginning journey for Instabase, because you started Instabase long before this current wave of AI. I think it was in 2018 when you went all in on transformer architecture. How did you think about product market fit in the early days when that technology was so nascent? Because I feel like there must be a lot of parallels to today's AI builders where the technology is still quite nascent, still quite new.
So I think the purpose of the company, the key problem that we wanted to solve was how we can help every organization in the world answer any question or take actions on their unstructured data. Now, the first question is, what is unstructured data? So we believe that anything that is not in nice database table format, we're going to call this unstructured data. Because if data is nicely structured in database, it's pretty easy, right? You can make a SQL query, reasonably well understood, like how to solve this. And we tried multiple different techniques, and people used to do this like really templates and then rules and then ML models, and none of those really worked. So we saw the transformer paper, and there was a model from Google called BERT at that time, and we tried that, and it didn't produce much result actually. So we were hopeless, like in the sense, is this problem even going to be solvable? And then we said, why it's not working? So Google's BERT model was basically kind of like encoding token is the sentence is sequence of tokens. That's what it was designed. So you take a sentence, you take each word, and then put that stuff. But document is not a sequence of words, right? You have just a bunch of things. You have layout, you have like columns, you have tables, and all of that kind of stuff. So what if you also encode X and Y coordinates so that it can start getting attention on the actual layout? So we just did some hack and experiments, and we saw the results working so well. And it wasn't any clever smartness that we went with transformer. Nothing else was working. So at least this one was working. So it was pretty simple decision. Although the people in the product and the field hated that, because when you go to a customer, like in 2019, saying, I need GPUs to run, they would be like, what are you talking about? And so we had some hurdles to cross, and a lot of people were like, no enterprises would ever buy if you go and ask them to have GPUs. But I'm glad that that turned out to be a good decision.
So it sounds like then that transformer decision was really a very natural one for you. You had already identified this huge problem that enterprises had to solve, and you found the only working solution for it, it sounds like.
Exactly. Nothing else worked well. So it was there was no smartness in that. I don't think there was anything else working well.
And I'm curious how this has all changed in the landscape of large language models since. Now that we have much larger general purpose models that are capable of understanding, how has that shifted product development and product market fit for you? And how have you adapted to that sort of models being widely available now and many other types of competing models being available?
Oh, yeah. So most of these large language models are actually pretty good, right? If you actually go and try documents and all that, they give you reasonably good accuracy, I think, and also very easy to use, right? Like you literally pass a document, you call an API, and you get the results. Always the question that we ask is, given now underlying technology is so much more powerful, what more you can do rather than some simple problems that we were solving is pretty well solved now. And if you look at most of the problems, I think the why customers have to even extract some stuff from documents. Typically, they don't care about single documents. There's some packet. That packet has many of those. And then they have to figure out, like, what are those different kinds of things and how basically those validate with each other. And so magical experience for customer is not a give a document and get a set of fields. That's one of the low-level things. It's just that earlier we were glamorizing that stuff because that itself was very hard. What is magical experience, let's say, for a bank who wants to like, let's say, do lending, for example? Magical experience is not that you can understand a pay stub. Right? I'm sure like you can do that. Magical experience is if somebody gives a mortgage packet, can you create a session with AI, like some kind of like where it can understand the whole packet, do all the validation, understands all of those things, ask the right questions, reach out to the customer if there needs to be something, and then help make the organization the decision quickly. The magical experience is now shifting from these field level accuracy or how much you got on a particular document to how many transactions you can do end to end automatically. So those possibilities now have begun to emerge because document extraction just becomes a tool in the bigger workflow that agent can run, right? So you can actually now define in the beginning at the build time, hey, how do I solve this problem? What are the set of steps? And define a workflow and then run this. But also, like, different models are good at different things. If you try ChatGPT, that might give you really bad result for something, but Gemini gives you much better result for something and some other. And I think one of the things that now you can do is you can use multiple models. You can validate something. So your accuracy level at straight through from document level to packet level to the entire like transaction level is going. I'll give you some data points, which is earlier, let's say if you had 90% field level accuracy, and let's say you were extracting about 25 fields per document. So if you look at 90% for 25 fields, the document level accuracy is 7.17%, because you will get on one document out of 25 fields, one of them wrong. So even if you got 95% or 90% right, doesn't mean because some human has to go and review all that. So the thing that is shifting now is no longer like your precision and recall at field level. It's just more of if you have 500-page long packet which has 60 different document types with all of these, how do you do end-to-end workflow? Earlier, the workflow level accuracy used to be like 3%, 4%. And now that's going up to 50%. So that's 2,500%, like whatever. That's basically, you're looking at literally the gain of 5,000, 6,000%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about talking about how field extraction, the simple AI task, that's something that is really just the first step. And the question to ask is, how much more can you do with it? And we talk a lot on this podcast actually about how people fear that the product they're creating is simply an LLM wrapper, that it doesn't actually provide much value, and that the LLM is doing most of the work. To your point, you can create these end-to-end workflows that work for the specific domains, that for banks or for healthcare in an industry that you're working in, where you can apply all of this domain knowledge to improve the workflow that much more for that particular customer or for that particular industry. So I think that's very true what you said. And instead of glamorizing the sort of small task to be done, or even to fear that the small task that can be done now by large language models is going to be a replacement for your product, you can focus more on the end-to-end value delivered by your product and the unique sort of value that you can create for your customer in the full scope of the workflow, not just of a simple task like field extraction.
And look, people will say whatever, don't pay too much attention to it, like LLM wrapper or whatever people want to call. Every SaaS company is a database wrapper. Well, you crud, right? Like you store things, you basically retrieve, you do something, and there's not any much difference from like being a database wrapper to LLM wrapper. So at the end, the way I tell all of the people is at the end, judge yourself by how much value you can create for your customer. And I think that's the ultimate thing that matters. And the point is, there's a lot of debate. What is different about this? And tell me differentiation. And I'm like, Cursor didn't tell you what is the differentiator. ChatGPT didn't tell you what is differentiator. It's just people love the product. It's like that provides huge value. And I think it's much important to be valuable, then be different. You can be different and not valuable, and that's not very useful. So I think if anyone who is building a product or the company is, don't too much worry about being LLM wrapper or database wrapper or whatever. Be useful. That is a lot more important.
100%. Yeah, definitely good advice to follow. And appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to double click on your experience working with banking customers and also just deeply regulated or legacy heavy industries in general. Early on in Instabase's history, you signed Standard Chartered as one of your first customers. So I'm curious, like since then, since that first huge customer that you signed, what you've learned about driving change in some of these sometimes slower to adopt technology industries or industries that are just heavily regulated.
Yeah, I think and we did a lot of the banking, insurance, healthcare. Those are all very heavily regulated industries, and we have many of the large banks. I think the 4 of the top 5 in the U.S. So what we have learned is that if you solve real problem, something that really moves the needle and creates value, you will be successful. Doesn't matter which industry you are in. They figure out a way to bring you in. I'm sure like every bank today must be using Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever the large language models are. Doesn't matter how regulated it is. Doesn't matter what bias AI has. Doesn't matter whatever else, because it's useful. So I think that the number one focus is, can you produce significant value for that industry? Because once you can create significant value, in general, they will find a way to bring you in. Second, it does bring some degree of rigor and operationalization that you have to do, because they require that you comply with this and that and whatever. And I think some of those are not bad. I think like some of those could be like little time consuming and annoying, but eventually I think that they are there for a reason. I think they should be revisited. Sometimes some banks, especially European ones, get a little too focused on every single details. But in general, what we have found, especially the US banks, reasonably friendly to the startups. So when they work with the startups, they try to be much more reasonable and don't put stringent terms. Enterprise readiness is, I think, critically important for anybody to be successful. The way to think about this is, for any company, there are 2 things that you have to worry about. One is drivers. Drivers is the key value proposition for which customers buy you. And second one is drags. Drags are the boring things that you have to do for them to keep paying you. And I think there is a balance between driver and drags, but the first thing you have to focus on is you need to have drivers. You can do all the drags, but if it doesn't provide value, it doesn't matter. Once you have all the drivers, you still have to do some drags, but you can get a pretty good leeway on those drags. Our experience has not been that bad, because a lot of people say how difficult it was to work with the bank and all that. Most of them have been pretty reasonable.
Awesome. That's super cool to hear, and really appreciate that insight that if you're creating enough value, they will find a way to use your product. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious for Instabase specifically, so much of your focus has been on unlocking value from those unstructured data repositories or use cases where, people like have these documents that just live somewhere and you need to pull insights or structured data out of it. What has been the hardest part about building that type of infrastructure? We have a lot of customers today at Paragon that are actually building towards the same problem, whether it be for RAG pipelines or for AI agents. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the hardest infrastructural parts to build in that area?
This has shifted over the period of time. So I think when we started the Kubernetes and containers, those were the new things. And I think at the very, very beginning, the biggest problem was these transformer models that you basically had to run in the containers, and you had to deploy inside customers' VPC, because many of the customers were not SaaS customer, and then figuring out their GPUs and their IT systems, those were very complicated. And now I think it's much, much easier because you can cut down 80% of your infrastructure because LLMs do that work. So, for example, let's say you want to process document. Earlier, you had to take this document, figure out all the images, do some image processing with OpenCV, then go and do some OCR, then run some model for table detection, checkbox detection, signature detection. Then you basically go and run some extraction model or classification model. Then you go and run. So you have 10 things that you have to run in the pipeline. Now you can pass a PDF to LLM and you can build some right kind of agentic stuff on top. You cut down 90% of your code base. Right? I think that now the more and more value in infrastructure sort of focus is shifting towards how do you run workflow that is much more reliable rather than all of the actual data processing infrastructure kind of thing. Because those are becoming like freely available either from the cloud providers or from LLM providers. I'm sure you can go to any cloud provider, they will give you RAG engine and they will give you the LLM endpoints and they will give you the bunch of other things. What I think the value that as a new company you can provide is what is the end user experience and the end user workflow. That is the one nobody has figured out. And you will see an example which is insane, like in the sense that Microsoft Copilot, right? Those guys had every ingredient that you needed to be successful, right? They basically had GitHub, and this is for coding, and they had sort of best models with OpenAI, and still Cursor and Windsurf got more popularity. And the reason why is because, and Cursor is built on VS Code, which is Microsoft's open source project. It's not that they invented the UX or something, but it's just the experience. It's just how this works. And I think I think that there is so much value, which is just so hard to really define. The reason why it's hard to define is because how do you define why people like some one product over other? Because they all have the same set of features. So it's not anymore who had more features and who had more whatever. It's about what kind of customer experience that you can enable that customers love this product. Like today, like if you look at OpenAI, no longer, I don't believe OpenAI to be a model company. If you look at Gemini, Gemini Pro actually, they'll beat OpenAI in most of the benchmarks, right? Like they have much better accuracy, much better results. We do the benchmark with Gemini models, are great if you see the how they work, and especially for multimodal stuff, they're far better than OpenAI. But the reason why OpenAI is very successful, I think they're an app company where they have something called ChatGPT, which 1 billion people use every single day. And if you have 1 billion people using this, so that's a very viral product company than really is a model company. They're not the best model company anymore. So I think that there is a massive opportunity in building a really good product that brings delight to people and that can make you very successful quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, focusing on ways that you can improve that user experience to a point where, people can't ignore your tool and like they have to use it even if like from a feature standpoint they're just so similar. I think there is an experiential aspect to it. I think I've actually heard people call it like the vibes of a model or the vibes of a product. It can just be better, and it is difficult to describe. I think this is why people would just default to calling it vibes sometimes, but it's very true. And I think that is there's definitely that experiential aspect to Cursor having won over, in some ways, GitHub Copilot, right? Yeah.
We did a survey internally within Instabase, and we had given people GitHub, and then we gave Cursor 2 or 3 months, and we said, hey, just tell me which one do you guys want, as we have to pick one. And the result was 134-0. So it tells you how the good experiences can fundamentally change the market success.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like then, in your view, since LLMs are replacing just so much of the types of infrastructure that you might have had to build if we were in 2018, are there any infrastructure bets that you would think that AI native companies should be taking today, if any? Or do you think they should just focus on some of the higher level stuff in the stack? How do we build a better agent workflow, or how do we build a better user experience on top of it?
Yeah. So I think the infrastructure that LLMs are replacing are intelligence and the tool use, because they already have the function tool and all that stuff, right? I think the area where you would still need your own infrastructure is the one which is not more of infrastructure, but more of the studio and design, which is like how people build these workflows. Second, I think that's where you need to build the infrastructure. And I do not see anything right now which is very good, is how do you run these workflows at scale in a reliable way? That infrastructure is yet to be figured out. Because if you look at LangChain, LangGraph, But they're good build time stuff. Runtime is yet to be figured out at scale. I think the temporal from Uber, the Uber Cadence project, they have a good workflow engine, but we will see like how they can run the AI workflow engine in a good way. So I do expect that there would be some AI workflow runtime scaling infrastructure project open source that might come out. Because how do you run the workflow at scale? Sure, you can build one, but like LangGraph or all those might allow you to build a graph, then you can compile and you can show some good result. And how do you run them at scale? I think there is still that part is yet to be figured out, which is what is the, and I'm sure you can pay some money to LangGraph and they will run it for you and has the whatever, some SaaS system where you can run on there. But I think that if you look at most of the very successful runtime, those tend to be open source, right? Like the Kubernetes or Docker or whatever those things are. So I think they're yet to be figured out the infrastructure for running complex end-to-end AI workflow at scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it also makes sense that you might want to opt for open source because there might be specific pieces of that AI agent workflow that you want to specifically observe more of that a SaaS might not have considered when they conceptualize their particular workflow runtime or what have you. At Paragon, we've built our own workflow runtime. We have a very specific set of tools around it to help us monitor integration activity and all of the nitty-gritty details of coordinating integration requests across a number of different services. So I can totally resonate with that idea that you would want to build your own tools or at least understand the tools that you have available to you as it relates to your own infrastructure if it's so core to your workflow. Like, for example, AI agents and how they operate over data sources or function tools, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's a really good insight.
100%. And then also, so many times you want AI to operate your tool. So another reason why Cursor is successful because you can open your terminal, can compile certain things and look at the debug log and the bug log, and then basically automatically try to correct certain things, and can also run the command line to deploy something in Kubernetes. So I think that every organizations have built a lot of their infrastructure on their own tooling. And so AI workflow has to run and need to have understanding of those tools. So it would not work. You cannot delegate that to the LLM because LLM doesn't have those tools available. So their function call and their tool use is not going to work for you. So you need a workflow execution layer that you control entirely. And I think that part of the infrastructure is still yet to be figured out, I think.
Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm actually curious, shifting over to the implementation side and talking about implementations that you've seen of Instabase with your customers or emergent implementations you've seen outside as well. I want to know what your thoughts are on how agents interact with unstructured data generally. I think there's this broader conversation as context windows continue to expand to 1 million tokens, 2 million tokens. I think people are throwing out numbers like 10 million in the near future. I'm curious, do you think that the kind of predominant model of RAG pipelines and vector search will continue to be that dominant architecture, or do you see something else taking its place? Like, will we ever get to a point where you just drop in unlimited amounts of unstructured data and the model can just figure it out? Or do you think we'll always have some sort of search index built over it? Curious what your thoughts are on that.
Very good question. I think there's the same question between vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Because Oracle was like, we'll keep building more and more CPU in a single machine that you can fit almost every single workload. So LLM, yeah, you keep increasing the context window. I don't think you can fit the entire world. So I just think you will hit the limit at some point. 10 million is not the limit. What if you want to do 100 million? What if you want to build 1 billion tokens, right? Maybe look at the log files of the last 1 month. That might be 1 billion token. I do not buy the argument that everything would fit in the context window. It won't. With this said, I think majority of simple use cases, any documents, up to 1,000 pages, 2,000 pages, 5,000 pages, you might fit in the context window. So it's the same classical problem of vertical scale and horizontal scale. So I think that, yes, it will keep getting better, keep getting more, but I think you need a certain degree of control. You don't know what is the accuracy drop-off when that goes up, because there is also the paper that says if you're putting more stuff in the context window, your accuracy drops and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, I'm not a big fan of RAG. The problem with RAG is you have to go figure out some chunks, and then if you miss there, and then you run into the problem. So I think RAG is a good tool that I think should be available to agent. If you look at Cursor, like when it has to go and figure out, it doesn't use RAG, it like runs a command line to grep something and find out the files that matches and then goes and does things. So I think that the way I see is retrieval is going to be an important tool available to every AI agent. that retrieval could come from SQL query, can come from vector database, can come from whatever, Lucene index or whatever the classical TF-IDF index. So I'm reasonably confident that retrieval would be an important part, but eventually I think the value would come from on the end-to-end workflow that can be dynamic and fluid, that can be created by the agent, and they can run it. And while running it, it could be that sometimes you might have to use RAG, sometimes you might not have to use RAG, sometimes you might have to use large context windows, sometimes you might have to chunk things and put in a memory and hierarchical summarization. There are so many different techniques that you can use. I do not think that RAG would be a prominent method of unstructured data understanding. I think RAG would be an important tool, like the way, like today, you have the sort of TF-IDF, full text index, those kind of good tools available for unstructured data. So I think RAG would be an important tool, but it's not going to replace all the things in the world. And I also don't believe that larger and larger context window will solve everything. I think that eventually a mechanism would emerge which would allow horizontal scaling, and those horizontal scaling would take advantage of all of these techniques, where RAG would be a tool, and maybe like you have to do in real time some map reduce to get something and then get an answer, or some other things. I just see RAG as a tool. I just see large context window as a tool. I think eventually the most power comes from dynamically deciding what is the approach to solve this problem and then running this. And of course, once you know the graph, then you can compile and that same graph can run forever or answering your questions. So I did give you answer of one versus the other, but I don't believe both of them alone would solve the problem. It's going to be the workflows.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like RAG pipelines, retrieval in general, will continue to be one tool of many in the toolkit of agents. And as we continue to add more agentic behavior to how agents actually do behave and how they decide what tools to use, that could just the specific techniques that we might be using for RAG today around chunking or optimizing for context windows of today, they may fall into the background as they are not replaced, but complemented by all of these other search tools that may be available.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. Anant, really appreciate you appearing on Future Proof, and thanks for sharing all of your experiences and thoughts.
No, thank you so much. Great.
Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to get all the latest episodes. And to view our past episodes, visit us at useparagon.com/futureproof.